Today I want to talk to you about the WTF varials from the Float Life. Last year I bought the whole set and I started out with riding the W's, and since then I never changed. Yeah. So when this varial system came out, we really didn't know if it was gonna be a solid piece of rail, but I was very curious as an engineer how Jeff has designed this, because I've noticed he had some ducktails there. And those things are really solid if you want to have a good connection and if you want to be able to interchange your setup in a quick run. So I was immediately intrigued by this setup, although I really prefer the look of the old OGs, the older rails, the squared ones. To me those look a lot more stylish, but once I figured out how the system worked, I really wanted to get a piece of this. So I ordered the full set, the full steez, and I went ahead and installed the W's. And since then I never really changed because they just feel so good. I want to dive into that with you guys today, and I want to share what my thoughts are on these W's. So let's dive in.
Once again, the Float Life has changed the game.
First off, I really like the functionality of having these interchangeable parts, but since I have two OneWheels, I have one regular setup with a CBXR and then my W's, and since I have these two setups, I didn't really feel the need to change one another. I do have the FAFs for racing, but since this is winter, it's not racing season, so I haven't tried them yet because the W's are just so much fun. So let's take them along. I have my board right here. Set it up. So what do these W's actually do? Well, they have a lowered center and they have an angled nose and tail, which kind of locks you in for balance because you're lower to the ground, which is really awesome. If you ride on full speed, you can really hang in those corners, and also for tricks you have a lot more balance. This stance really helps to get you locked in on the one wheel, and you don't really have the feeling like on the straight rails that your feet can slip off the rails because you have these angles. I also have this in combination with the Cush Low, which is really awesome because the Cush has this slight angle which gets you locked in even more, and it also has a very good and grippy grip tape which keep your feet on the board, which is really important because you don't want to hang loose and lose the grip on the feet, because that really hurts you. So as you can see, they have connections right here. There's 4 bolts keeping this together, but the bolts are actually not doing a lot because the most of the load is on the ducktails, and these things are really well designed. They just slide into each other really well, and once you have them locked with the screws, there's no loosening them. I actually have them on there for 6 months and I never had to tighten these screws ever. If you want to take them off, you just pop out the 2 middle ones and the thing just comes right off. In about 5 to 10 minutes you can change these rails to straight rails, to FAFs, to the Bodhi steez if you have them already. I really would love to have them in pink, but they have never arrived in Europe, so Float Life, please get us a pink batch, because that's what you promised us in the videos. And now everything is just clear stuff. Like these two, if you ordered them the first time, you got this nice golden look. Now everything is just plain gray. So please get us the pink steez, Float Life. We really like the pink steez. So these rails are made out of 70-75 steel, which is twice as strong as the stock batch, which is really good for all the high drops and all the stuff we do. We kind of throw this thing at everything, so that's really needed to have a good and solid board that won't bend on you. On the inside, these things are also thickened on the stress zones, which is really good. They're not solid material. They just have reinforcements where needed. All right, let's get this board off and continue with the video. Muddy Belgium. For street rides, I ride them in the mission settings because I like the feeling of having them very low, and also to have them balanced out to ride in 2 directions, because that's quite important when you ride street. The lowered center of gravity is really awesome for tricks because you have a lot more balance. For instance, if you do shove-its and it's really low to the ground, it's just easier to catch those tricks and to balance them out. Then for slides on bars, I really like the locked-in feeling of the angled profile because that's what gets you really locked in for those slides, and you can hold on to the slides for a really long time. Something that I really often had with a stock board is having some kind of a backlash when landing on a big drop. And what I've noticed is that the W's really lock you in so good. It's kind of like a poppy feeling, which makes sure that the board like kind of is glued to your feet. And that's something that I really like because the backlash can really hit you hard on the bottom of your feet, which kind of hurts. And that's something that you really want to avoid. These W's do a great job on that part. So they are definitely a good addition for my street style game because now I'm a lot more confident when I ride street style stuff or in the skate parks. So I guess Jeff wasn't kidding when he mentioned that these things were rock solid.
They're rock solid. For anyone that's worried about like, oh, they're gonna bend. They're not gonna bend. We've been riding them tough. We've been building this thing for 6 months, so they're rock solid.
How do they perform on the trails? Well, for the trails, I always ride them in custom +3 settings because when you have them in mission settings, you really lose a lot of clearance because the nose is really low when you take off. And in the trails, you always have bumps, lumps, stones and sticks. And what you kind of want to avoid is getting that nose stuck into those things. So that's why I always rock them in the +3 settings, which keeps that nose right up there so you can avoid all that nasty stuff. Also here, the lowered center is a really big plus because in the corners of the trails you can really feel that you can push a lot harder than on the straight rails. That's really a comforting feeling because you know that you're a lot more safe if you can hang in there, and it kind of feels a lot more like snowboarding when you are standing on the W's. Riding these rails does take some getting used to on the uphill, and that's because of the low nose. Again, some scraping, but we still manage with some good weight distribution to get up here. Oh, this is so steep, but the WTFs hold on. I didn't expect that on this uphill. Wow! If you start riding uphill, the nose is again starting to scrape the surface. It just takes some getting used to. I'm kind of comfortable with making myself light on a skateboard for grinds and stuff, and it's kind of the same thing. You just have to make sure that you're light on your feet, and then you can just hover up that hill. Then if you start riding downhill, there's a good clearance because of the angle. With the WTFs, if you ride backwards with the +3 settings, you have to deal with this riding backwards, which is a bit awkward, but we'll manage. The one thing that I really like about these rails is once you hit the pushback, the board kind of levels itself out and you're riding in a normal stance, which is really awesome because we like to push the limits and we ride on pushback a lot. Once you know your board, you can really do that. If you're a beginner, please stay away from that stuff because you really have to get familiar with the feeling of the board before you start doing that. But it's unavoidable. If you start racing, you will have to hit pushback and you will have to get comfortable with that. And the W's are really helpful because they level out on that pushback feeling. So you kind of have the feeling that you're riding in a normal modus. But I do mean this, be careful and make sure that you know your board and that you know your own limits before you start hitting those pushback rides. If you haven't ordered them yet, really don't doubt on this purchase because this really is such a good system where you can have interchangeable parts for your rails, which kind of avoids you having to pay 500 euros, 600 euros for a pair of rails each time. The Float Life has done a really good job designing this system, and I already noticed that they are putting out new stuff like the Bodhi steez, which is really awesome. People get to play around with their own board without having to lose a lot of money. It's just the most awesome thing that we get some more control on our setup and that we get some bang for buck. So thanks Jeff and the Float Life team. And on that note, I'm gonna love you and leave you. Peace out, and I'll see you on the next one. Bam!